All right, so this is the demonstration of how to put in an inset sleeve. So here I have the sleeve cut out. Now the pattern is removed, but you can see the notch there at the back, the double notch representing the back of the sleeve, and the single here representing the front, and also the shoulder notch has already been notched in. So we've gotten this far already. I have put tailor tacks because the tailor tacks are a better representation of where the actual point or position is. Okay, so you can see the matching tailor tacks on the bodice. Right. So just remembering that the notches there only indicate a position that's 1.5 in. Okay, and so on your angled lines and stuff, it can be a little bit hard to estimate. Okay, so that's your sleeve. So once you've taken your pattern off, the very first thing you need to do is be sure that you get two opposite sleeves. So the way to do that is fold one this direction, so up and over the kind of top, and fold one underneath. Okay, that's how I do it, and I know that I'll have two opposites. Does that make sense? So I mean, you can just double check. You should always place your pieces on the table so that you can see that they're two opposites. So I can check. This is the back notch and the back notch there, and the front notch is underneath, so they're two opposites. Okay, I usually just pin them straight away to be sure that they don't get mixed up or changed. Okay, so I can put that there, and I know with the pin in it, it will be saved. Now, move that a bit closer. Okay, so I'm just going to zip down this sleeve really quick. So once you have the sleeve, one sleeve here, and you would literally press that open usually. I'm going to fold it through the right way out and find the armhole that it fits into. Okay, so if that's a back notch and that's a front, then it will go to, yeah, it will go to this side. All right. So I always come from the outside of the sleeve. I think it's easier to figure out when you come from the outside of the garment. It just kind of makes sense to you naturally when you're putting things together from the outside of the garment. So I always start there. And what you do is match the side seam of the bodice of the garment to the inseam there of the sleeve. And so then we know it's definitely the correct sleeve is on the correct side. After that, once I've got it there, I actually flip it around into the and work from the inside there. Okay, so I can put it in this position. Okay, and I'll just show you here for a minute. If I take this in to the inside, you can see now that the tailor tacks are going to match there and there. It will be really easy to see where they match. Even when I hold them, you can see the snips don't necessarily match, but the tailor tacks do. So that's the advantage of the tailor tack, it's the exact position matches. But as you hold it there, you can see that it's not lining up. There's too much here in the sleeve head. So there is actually physically more in the pattern, which is there to create the ease, to give more room on the top of the sleeve, and also to create that turning shape. All right. So we need to manage that ease. So the whole point and the difficulty of sewing an inset sleeve is managing this ease. So the way I do it is, now I know Karen has shown you a method, I think, where she just, stitches along and it kind of starts to shape it. I do actually leave the thread in and stitch it. I do what's called an ease stitch. So I go from the front notch to the back notch, just along very close to the 1.5 or right along that, and I just do a long stitch length. So change the machine there down to the longest stitch length, it's number 5 on this Bernina, or whichever it is on whatever machine you're using. And you don't need to backstitch. This stitch will be removed afterwards, so just put it along the 1.5 and beyond. Now, it's important to understand, it's really important to call it an ease stitch because it is not meant to gather, and you shouldn't have a sleeve that looks gathered at the top. Okay, so I just went from one notch to the other with my ease stitch, my long stitch length. I suppose you could do that while the sleeve is separate. It might be a little bit more, maybe less awkward. Okay, so then you grab the bobbin thread, if you can find it, or whichever one will work, and you just pull it. And what happens is this controls the sleeve. Ease. So do you see the way once you pull that, it kind of creates it into that shape? Yeah, which is handy. Yeah.
Did you backstitch at the end?
I didn't backstitch. Yeah, no.
But you left enough so you wouldn't pull it through.
Yeah, just left a bit.
Okay.
You could, I suppose, backstitch on one side and just pull from one, but it's true.
You pull from both ends?
I just pulled from both ends. It is true they start to kind of unravel a little bit, so, but for this particular bit, it's quite short, and really, usually that's fine. So do you see the way it manages it? To me, I like it because it manages it, it changes it. So I do think the stitching, like that, say that Karen has shown, it does do it as well, but this really holds it in place. So whichever works for you, and it might depend on the fabric you're using. Certain fabrics might really need to actually have the thread in it, and yeah. So then I'm matching my notch up at the top, the shoulder notch, with the shoulder seam. So like all of the things then in terms of pinning, you know, you always try and pin the start and end, or the top and bottom of a piece that you're stitching, and then you go to your notches. All right, so I'm going to line up, I'm going to pay more attention to my tailor tacks and line them up. And you can see that the actual snip positions are a little bit off. That's because of the angles and the line. So, but I want the actual position itself to line up, and so I can pin it there. So while tailor tacks take a few minutes, it means that when you're actually on the garment, you know for sure you have them perfectly lined up. So I highly recommend them for anything that has a curve. Or an unusual shape. Anything that's 90 degrees, you know, you just probably don't need them, but the other one's very handy. Okay, so just see the way how much more organized that is, and how much easier it is now to like manage basically, and manage to pin. So then it just takes a while to pin it. What you're trying to do is pin it so that you don't, when you sew it, you're not going to get a tuck. It's not meant to tuck, it's meant to ease in. And that is a hard thing to do. Also, yours, really ideally, you have more ease in the top. So the top of the shoulder takes a harder turn, so needs more ease than down here. So you know, by eye visually, you'll have a little bit more here, and you can see how much more by the wiggle and the seam allowance. That kind of represents there's more ease in there, and this is flatter here. Okay, now this takes some time. And particularly when you're learning, you know, you might take a little bit longer than me to kind of get it right. I would advise maybe when you pin it, particularly on the real garment, or like on the real fabric, maybe let me have a look at your pinning, and I might repin it and rearrange it a little bit so that you're kind of successful on the first go. This also is somewhere where I would pin quite a lot, put quite a lot of pins in. So I'll be putting pins in between. So I'm feeling with my fingers in between, like here along the 1.5 line, to see that, you know, there isn't an unmanageable amount of ease. Like I'm definitely going to get a tuck in that section, so I need to move that ease, or, you know, distribute it a little bit more. up and down so that it's okay. And you just do the best you can on the pinning and the stitching. And if you do get a bit of a little tuck, best thing is just keep sewing, and you can come back and just take out that little section. So, all right. Now, the calico isn't a great fabric for easing in. Like, it doesn't really ease in very well, like perfectly in this pattern. Really, probably for this fabric, I would take out a little bit of ease, okay? Because you'll see, I'll do it and it'll be a little bit puckery, just, you know. So it depends. If you were using this pattern and you had kind of suiting wool or whatever, it would probably ease in very nicely. So it just depends on your fabric. Okay, so then you go into the machine, and this is the tricky bit. Well, it can take a long time to pin as well. You know, it might take you 20 minutes, half an hour, even just to get it arranged. Depends. And then to sew it. So I usually start at the seam and make sure my seams are open. You can always pin on each side of the seam to be sure that they're open. So the difficulty with sewing in the sleeve is you're concentrating on several things at once. You've got a curve coming this way, so you've got to organize the garment that's in front of the position that is sewing, you know, so that it's always lined up with the 1.5. So that's one thing you're doing. You're also organizing, so my finger is going underneath here and it's organizing all the bulk underneath so that it's flat. I only need the section right in front of my, where I'm stitching, to be flat. So I'm just constantly doing that. So a lot of time as I'm sewing, you might not be able to see it, but I'm constantly with my finger and my hand underneath, being sure it's flat, and being sure that, say, like another part of the garment isn't folding up and underneath it as well. So just constantly clearing from underneath. And all you have to aim for is about that much and stitch, and then rearrange and clear the next bit and stitch.
Does it make a difference if what you're using is on the bottom or the top? Like if you were to
Yes,
sew
that's a very good question. Yeah, I would definitely have it on the top so you can see it. If you try and have that underneath, you won't be able to see and you won't be able to manipulate and do exactly what I'm doing. So excellent question to point it out. Okay, so remember to come back and bring that back off of the ease stitch down to the regular stitch length, 2.5. Okay, it's very annoying when you forget because you have to do it again. So back stitch, and so this bit up to the notch is fairly easy. You're just working on going around that curve, which is tricky enough. So as there's a fabric release there, you pull the bit in front down. Again, with my finger, I'm just clearing underneath to see. It's actually it's about to tuck there. Okay, it's quite a common. I know that this particular spot is quite common to get a tuck in, so just double checking because it takes quite a steep curve. Okay. All right, so now we get to the bit that we're easing, and I use a pin actually a lot of the time. So the seam allowance is very wobbly, up and down, kind of there's excess, and if you don't organize that seam allowance, if you let it, it will fold over on itself, and basically that's what creates the tuck. So you've got to try and organize the seam allowance so that it's kind of going a little bit at a time all the time, and not creating a big tuck. All right, so this is how I do it. I have a finger on each side and I'm kind of flattening it like this. And when things get a little tricky, I kind of use the pin. It's kind of a shorter pin, longer pin is good. And I kind of flatten it out. So I'm keeping one eye on this 1.5 there, so that it doesn't tuck. You can see a tuck coming. If you see a tuck coming, you can literally lift and use the pin to sort of spread it out. Okay. I feel like I'm getting tucks here. pinning because I feel like it's not very well arranged. And so, yeah, so we just keep going like that, using your pins and easing it in, trying to avoid any tucks. Okay, again, keeping an eye on the 1.5 there, and we are coming up to the hardest point here, that's why it's so tricky. So just notice how much I'm starting and stopping. It's not like a quick, you know, sew it all the way through and it's going to be grand. You really need to organize it, and like that's what I do. I put the pin along that seam line that I'm stitching in front and kind of move the seam allowance out to the side to try and keep it. One side is harder. The front has more ease in it than the back, so you'll find, I think we've just done the front. You'll get halfway and one will be like a lot easier. Okay, again rearranging, doing a sweep underneath to make sure it's flat. And yeah, this is getting into the easier bit. Okay, and we just keep going around all the way. Okay, this bit's a bit easier. This bit with the steep curve is the one you really need to check underneath because that's usually where the tuck comes from. Okay, so that's it there. I feel like there was little tucks on this on the front, but so you have the sleeve in there, and you can pull out the tailor tacks afterwards when they're finished, and there shouldn't be any obvious, tuck or pucker. Yeah, the front isn't great, and so this is what I mean about if you get something like that, it means you need to adjust your pattern. It's maybe with calico, there's maybe just too much ease for this, fabric. So I kind of know that because I've done it a few times in calico. But that's more like what it should look like. Yeah, and that's that. Yeah, great.